but that the data still remain equivocal. Okay, what I show here are the subsets, the data from the subset of participants in these studies who were overweight or who had overweight or obesity at baseline prior to the intervention. And in that group, there was a beneficial effect of reducing sugar-sweetened beverage consumption. This effect moves closer to this line and is not significant when the whole group is considered. We'll come back to this concept of effect modification by body mass index in just a moment. So I'm going to now, these two studies that tipped the needle, I'm going to talk a bit about the interventions that were done in those studies, remembering that my charge today was to talk about interventions. One of the studies was done here in Boston by David and I and our team, and the other study was done in the Netherlands. Both of these studies, as noted in the previous slide, were published in 2012. As I'm talking through these, you may want to ask yourself, are these applied effectiveness studies or rigorously controlled efficacy studies? Is control over consumption adequate? Do these studies convince you that reducing sugar-sweetened beverages can be beneficial for weight loss? Okay, so this is the study design of our Boston study. We enrolled 224 adolescents, 124 boys, and 100 girls. They all had a body mass index greater than or equal to the 85th percentile for sex and age, based on pilot work that we had previously done showing that the effect was really most dramatic in those children who had a high BMI at baseline. All of these participants also consumed greater than or equal to 1 serving, defined as 12 fluid ounces per day, of sugar-sweetened beverages. We randomly assigned them to an experimental or a control group for an intervention period and then a follow-up period. During the intervention period, the experimental group received non-caloric beverage deliveries, and the control group received supermarket gift cards with which they could buy whatever they desired. We assessed body mass index at baseline at 1 year, and then again at 2 years at the end of a follow-up period during which the intervention was withdrawn. They were no longer getting intervention during this follow-up period. The primary outcome was at 2 years, and we also conducted 24-hour dietary recall interviews unannounced by telephone in order to assess dietary intake. We provided compensation to the participants for their participation. We did this in collaboration with schools, and these two things, the compensation and the collaboration with schools, allowed us to have an impressive retention rate in this study. So what was the intervention? Well, we did home deliveries of non-caloric beverages. So we were aiming to change the home environment, literally flood the home with beverages that we wanted children to drink. They could choose from bottled water or diet beverages. A lot of times when I go out and mention this study, people look at me like, ooh, diet beverages. Why did you do that? The reason was that we saw the diet beverages at that time as a stepping stone from sugary beverages to water. We did offer those as non-caloric beverages. The home deliveries occurred every 2 weeks, and we used an online delivery service. For those of you in Boston, you'll recognize the Peapod service. It's affiliated with Stop and Shop. We also provided written intervention messages, and I'll show you these messages in a moment. They really focused, well, here are the messages, focusing on drinking the delivered beverages instead of sugary drinks and not buying or drinking sugary beverages. And we emphasized unsweetened water over artificially sweetened beverages, but again, the diet beverages were considered a stepping stone. We did motivational telephone calls with parents. These were done monthly by a dietitian, 30 minutes per call. We focused on stimulus control, or not bringing sugary beverages into the home, creating a healthful home environment, and role modeling. And check-in visits with participants were done. There were 3 spaced during the intervention period, 20 minutes per visit. And we had these think before you drink messages, which have served us well in a couple of studies, and that's what I'll talk to you about in just a moment. I do want to note that discussions during the telephone calls and check-in visits focused exclusively on beverage consumption, with no attention to other dietary behaviors or physical activity. And we recorded the calls that the dietitians made with the parents, so that we could listen to a subset of them and make sure we weren't deviating to doing something more than just recommending reduced consumption of sugary beverages. So no difference. There were approximately equal numbers of males and females. We had 46 Hispanic participants, and I'll talk a little bit about that subset of the sample in just a moment, and representation from a variety of racial groups, although it was primarily a white group. So, baseline beverage intake. At baseline, the participants were consuming about 1.7 servings per day. Remember, we were recruiting people who were consuming at least 1 serving per day of sugar-sweetened beverages. In terms of fruit juice consumption, less than a half serving per day. They were not big consumers of artificially sweetened beverages, probably because they were drinking a lot of the sugary beverages, and only about 1 12 fluid ounce serving of unsweetened beverage or water per day. So these are the beverage data based on self-report, the 24-hour dietary recall interviews, and we did note a change in sugar-sweetened beverage consumption that differed by study group at 1 year and 2 years. We noted a slight decrease in 100% fruit juice consumption, but keep in mind they weren't drinking all that much at baseline. The group difference was apparent at 1 year, but not at 2 years. In terms of artificially sweetened beverages, there was a significant increase. Again, these were part of the menu which they could choose from. But this suggests that our stepping stone approach may have worked in that there was no difference at 2 years. And unsweetened beverage intake went up in the experimental group. And these just show parallel changes in energy intake and sugar consumption. No surprise there. So, what did we find? These are the data for change in BMI on the y-axis at 1 year and at 2 years. There is a significant difference at 1 year, equating to 0.57 BMI units, or nearly 2 kilogram difference. We did not see a significant effect at 2 years, but keep in mind that we withdrew the intervention. And in our study, in our analyses of effect mediation, sugar intake was a significant mediator. Okay, so our friends in the Netherlands did another study that was published at the same time, and I have a few slides on their study as well. We'll call this the Dutch study. Their study was a bit larger than ours, 641 children They were a little bit younger, 5 to 11 years of age, as opposed to teenagers. And these children also were all habitual consumers of sugar-sweetened beverages. They brought a sugar-sweetened beverage to school. The duration of their study was 18 months. And what's really neat about this study is that it's a double-blind randomized controlled trial. How many times do you see a double-blind nutrition study? Not very often, because people can see the food that they're eating. They had beverages specially formulated for the study. One of the beverages was sugar-free and contained sucralose and ACE-K. The other contained sugar equating to about 104 calories per can. These study beverages replaced the habitually consumed sugar-sweetened beverages, and the goal was 8 cans per week. And this was done in the school so that the cans were distributed to the children at school. Again, these are not commercial beverages. They were designed by the research team. They all looked the same to the children. They also had a good process measure in that they measured urinary sucralose, and the higher levels in the sugar-free group across all time points in the study suggest that the children were drinking the beverages, at least the sugar-free ones. They also collected returned cans, and for both groups, about 85% of the cans were empty and only 15% were full, again suggesting that they were getting some compliance. So what did the outcomes show? Well, here we have body mass index Z-score as a function of time, and for the group that consumed the sugar, their body mass index Z-score went up more than for those who were in the sugar-free group. Again, suggesting that by decreasing consumption of sugary beverages, one can decrease body mass index. In their discussion, they speculated that liquid sugar is not sensed by satiating mechanisms and that calorie compensation or decreased consumption of other foods is incomplete. And that with regard to the sugar-free group, reduced ingestion of liquid sugars might reduce insulin spike and thus reduce hunger. They speculated that water or other non-caloric beverages would be effective, although they can't say that definitively because they did not have a water group in this study. Okay, moving on to the next question that was proposed in my set of background questions. Are some individuals particularly susceptible to the adverse effects of sugar-sweetened beverages? And for this, we really look at effect modification. So, are there variables that modify the effect of sugar-sweetened beverage intake on change in body mass index? And a couple of studies have shown, as I alluded to earlier, that BMI is a significant effect modifier. The Dutch study that I just mentioned and the pilot study, I'm not going to show results of our pilot study today, but we also saw effect modification in that study. And then in the Boston study, we noted effect modification by ethnic group. So I'd like to just show you data, some more data from the Dutch study and the Boston study with regard to effect modification. These are from the Dutch study, published in an article several years later. But for the children for whom BMI was above the median, the effect was greater